The room was small and quiet, the kind of place most people would pass without noticing. A single window faced the street, letting in soft light during the day and the glow of street lamps at night. In the corner stood an old piano. Some keys were worn, some slightly yellow, but every one of them still held a sound waiting to be released. He often sat there alone after the world had gone quiet. No audience, no applause, just him, the piano, and the heavy silence of the night. When he played, he usually closed his eyes. Not because he wanted to look mysterious, but because it helped him forget everything else. Bills, worries, old memories, and the feeling of being invisible all faded away once his fingers touched the keys. He was not born into music. No one in his family played instruments or talked about art. Life around him was practical and demanding. People worked long hours and measured success by how much money came home at the end of the day. Music was seen as a hobby at best, a waste of time at worst. Still, from a young age, he felt something pull him toward sound. Even simple tunes on the radio made him pause and listen closely, as if the notes were speaking a language only he could understand. The first time he touched a piano, he was still a child. It was at a place he didn't belong to, somewhere he was only visiting briefly. The piano was dusty and clearly unused, but when he pressed a key, the sound surprised him. It stayed in his head long after he left. From that moment, something changed. He didn't know how to explain it, but he felt like a door had opened inside him. Years passed before he could sit at a piano again. Life moved on and responsibilities grew heavier. School, work, family duties, everything demanded attention. But the memory of that sound never left. When he finally found a second-hand piano much later, he bought it without thinking too much. Took most of his savings. Some people questioned the decision. Others laughed quietly. He didn't argue. He simply carried it home and placed it in the corner of the room. At first, he didn't know what he was doing. His fingers were stiff and slow. He pressed wrong keys again and again. The sounds clashed, and sometimes it felt painful to listen. But he didn't stop. Every night, after long days that drained his energy, he returned to the piano. He learned by listening, repeating, and feeling. There were no lessons, no teachers guiding his hands. Just patience, frustration, and small moments of progress. He learned that the piano responded to emotion as much as skill. When he was tired, the music sounded heavy. When he was sad, the notes felt distant. On rare days when he felt calm, the piano seemed to breathe with him. Slowly, his hands began to move more freely. He no longer thought about which key to press next. His fingers remembered on their own. Most people around him had no idea what he was building in that quiet room. To them, he was just another person trying to get through life. He spoke little about himself. He listened more than he talked. There was a kindness in him, but also a deep sense of being apart. He had learned early not to expect attention, so he didn't seek it. At night, the piano became his only honest companion. He could sit there for hours, eyes shut, hands flying across the keys without realizing how much time had passed. The outside world disappeared. In those moments, he wasn't struggling, failing, or worrying. He was simply present. Sometimes neighbors heard faint music through the walls or open windows. Some paused to listen. Others ignored it, thinking it was just noise from another apartment. No one knocked to ask who was playing. No one guessed how much of his heart lived in those sounds. He played differently from others. He didn't follow songs the way they were meant to be played. He bent them, stretched them, slowed them down, or sped them up. The piano was not something he controlled. It was something he spoke with. His hands moved fast, then soft, then fast again, like they were chasing thoughts he couldn't put into words. There were nights when he stopped playing suddenly, hands resting on the keys, chest heavy. Memories would rise without warning. Missed chances, words he never said, moments where he wished he had been braver. Instead of pushing them away, he let the music carry those feelings. The piano never judged. It simply answered. He never thought of himself as special. He didn't use big words to describe what he felt when he played. To him, it was simple. Music helped him breathe. It helped him sleep. It helped him feel less alone in a world that often moved too fast and listened too little. During the day, he blended into the crowd. He went to work, handled his duties, and returned home quietly. People passed him without a second glance. No one knew that at night, his hands created something powerful and honest. He didn't mind being unseen. In a way, it gave him freedom. But deep inside, something was slowly changing. Each night at the piano made his connection stronger. His confidence grew not in how others saw him, but in how he understood himself. He began to trust his hands, to let them move without fear of mistakes. The music became more alive, more certain. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet routine was leading him somewhere. The small room, the worn piano, the lonely nights. All of it was shaping a moment waiting to happen. A moment when the world would finally pause and listen. For now, though, it was just another night. The lights outside dimmed. The room filled with soft echoes. He closed his eyes, placed his fingers on the keys, and let the music speak for him, unaware that these hidden hours were the beginning of a story much bigger than he ever imagined. The days began to feel different, even though nothing around him had changed. The same streets, the same routine, the same quiet room waited for him each night. But inside, something had shifted. His hands felt lighter when he touched the piano, like they were no longer asking permission to move. They simply knew where to go. He started noticing small things he had missed before. How certain notes felt warmer than others. How silence between sounds mattered just as much as the sound itself. Sometimes he would pause mid-play, letting the quiet sit in the room, then return softly. Those moments felt honest, like breathing in before speaking. He still played mostly at night. It was the only time he felt free enough to let go. During the day, his mind stayed busy with responsibilities, but at night, the piano carried those thoughts away. He didn't plan what he would play. Each session began with a single note, and the rest followed naturally, like a story finding its own path. One evening, he left the window slightly open. The air was warm, and the room felt heavy without it. As he played, the sound drifted outside, mixing with distant traffic and night sounds. He didn't think much of it. To him, it was just another night of letting his thoughts flow through the keys. A person passing by slowed their steps. They didn't know why at first. The music didn't demand attention, but it invited it. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It felt personal, like someone speaking quietly but clearly. The listener stood still for a moment, then moved on, carrying the sound with them. Inside the room, he remained unaware. His eyes were closed, his head slightly lowered. His hands moved faster now, not rushed, but confident. There were no sharp mistakes anymore, only choices. Even when a note sounded unexpected, he didn't stop. He followed it, turning it into something new. He began to understand that he didn't need to copy anyone. For a long time, he thought real musicians followed rules he didn't know. But now, the piano taught him something different. Truth mattered more than perfection. Feeling mattered more than form. Sometimes he smiled while playing, not because he was happy, but because he felt understood. The piano answered him in a way people rarely did. It listened without interrupting. It responded without judgment. Slowly, his confidence spilled into small parts of his life. He spoke a little more at work. He held eye contact longer. These were tiny changes, barely noticeable, but they mattered to him. The music was shaping him, not just filling his nights. He still didn't tell anyone about the piano. It felt too personal, too fragile to explain. Words could never match what the music did. He feared that talking about it would make it smaller. On one weekend afternoon, he sat at the piano earlier than usual. Sunlight filled the room, landing softly on the keys. The piano looked different in the light, less mysterious, more honest. He played slowly, almost carefully, like he was meeting an old friend in a new place. That afternoon, someone nearby heard him again. This time, they listened longer. They leaned against a wall, letting the sound wash over them. It felt calming, grounding, like the music was reminding them to slow down. When the playing stopped, the silence felt heavy, like something important had ended too soon. He closed the lid of the piano and sat quietly. He didn't feel tired. He felt full. the kind of fullness that doesn't come from food or rest, but from release. As days passed, these small moments of being heard began to happen more often, though he never saw the listeners. He remained in his world, unaware of the quiet impact he was making. At night, his playing grew more daring. His hands moved faster, then softer, then paused completely before diving back in. It was as if his emotions had learned how to speak clearly at last. Each session felt deeper than the one before. There were nights when he finished playing and sat in silence, heart beating fast, as if he had just run a long distance. Other nights ended gently, with a final soft note hanging in the air. He didn't know where this path was leading. He wasn't chasing anything, but something was building, slowly and quietly, like pressure beneath the surface. For now, he returned to his routine. Work, home, piano, sleep. The cycle continued. But the music was no longer hidden only inside him. It was beginning to reach beyond the walls, touching lives he would never see. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between those notes, a moment was waiting. A moment that would bring his hidden world into the open, whether he was ready or not. The change came on an ordinary day, the kind that usually passed without leaving a mark. He finished work later than usual and felt tired in a way sleep didn't fix. The evening air felt heavy, and the city sounded louder than normal. Instead of going straight home, he wandered for a while, letting his feet decide where to go. He found himself near a small public place where people often passed through without stopping. There was an old piano there, placed more as decoration than something meant to be played. The keys were uncovered, slightly dusty, and out of tune in places. He stood nearby, watching people walk past it like it didn't exist. He felt a pull he couldn't explain. His heart beat faster, and his hands felt warm. Playing outside his room felt risky. There would be eyes, judgments, and noise. For a moment, he considered walking away. He had never played for strangers before. The thought made his chest tighten. Then he remembered the nights alone with the piano. The honesty, the quiet courage he found there. Without overthinking, he sat down. At first, his fingers hovered above the keys. The place was loud, filled with footsteps and distant voices. He closed his eyes, the same way he always did, and took a slow breath. His hands touched the piano, and the first note sounded. It wasn't perfect. The piano fought back a little. Some keys sounded flat. Others rang too sharp. But instead of stopping, he adjusted. He listened carefully and let his hands respond. The noise around him faded as the music grew stronger. People slowed down. A few stopped walking. No one spoke. The sound carried in a way that felt different from his room. It was open, exposed, and alive. His hands moved faster, then softer, finding balance. He forgot where he was. He forgot the faces nearby. The piano became his only focus. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. The music poured out, full of emotion he didn't even know he had been holding. Someone nearby lifted a phone, not to interrupt, but to capture the moment quietly. Others watched with curiosity, then with focus. The air felt still, like the world had decided to pause. He played as if he had been waiting his whole life for that piano. His hands flew across the keys with confidence, not showing off, but expressing something deep and real. There were soft moments that felt like whispers, and powerful ones that felt like release. When the final note faded, the silence felt heavy. For a second, no one moved. Then gentle clapping began, slow and unsure at first, then growing. He opened his eyes, surprised. He hadn't expected a reaction. His face warmed, and he stood up quickly, stepping away from the piano. The attention felt sudden and overwhelming. He nodded politely and walked away before anyone could speak to him. His heart raced as he moved through the crowd. He felt exposed, like someone had seen a part of him he usually kept hidden. At the same time, there was a strange warmth in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name. That night, he returned home and sat at his own piano, but he didn't play right away. He stared at the keys, replaying the moment in his head. The faces, the silence, the sound carrying beyond him. He finally played, but it felt different. The music carried new weight. Not heavier, just fuller. Like something had opened. The next day, his routine stayed the same. Work, travel, quiet thoughts. But something unexpected happened. A short video of the public performance began to spread online. He didn't know about it at first. He wasn't looking for it. Messages appeared from strangers who had been there. Comments spoke about how the music made them stop, breathe, feel something they hadn't felt in a while. Some said it helped them through a hard day. Others said it reminded them of someone they missed. When he finally saw the video, his hands shook slightly. Watching himself from the outside felt strange. He noticed things he never thought about before. The way he leaned into the piano, the calm on his face, the trust in his hands. He felt proud but also afraid. The quiet world he built was no longer just his. People wanted more. They asked where they could hear him again. That night, he played longer than usual. The music came out fast and strong, then slowed into gentle waves. He worked through the fear, the excitement, and the doubt all at once. He realized something important as the night grew quiet. The moment in public didn't change who he was. It only showed him that his music had a place beyond the walls of his room. Still, questions remained. How much of himself was he willing to share? Could he protect the honesty of his music in a louder world? As he closed the piano lid and prepared for sleep, he knew one thing for certain. The door he once opened with a single note had now opened wider. There was no turning back. Outside, the city moved as always. Inside, his story had taken a turn, carrying him toward a future he never planned, but was slowly learning to accept. The attention came slowly at first, like a soft wind brushing against a quiet tree. Then it grew stronger, harder to ignore. Messages, calls, and requests for performances began to appear, unplanned and unexpected. Strangers who had seen the video online reached out, some praising, some curious, some wanting more. The world he had once moved through unseen was starting to notice. He felt a mix of excitement and unease. Excitement because his music finally seemed to touch others. Unease because attention always carried expectations. People wanted perfection, consistency, and energy. They wanted performances that matched the magic in that single video. And he was beginning to wonder if he could ever give that. For weeks, he struggled with these feelings. During the day, he carried on as usual, quiet, observant, careful. At night, he played, but each note felt heavier, burdened by the pressure to impress, to meet invisible standards. His hands no longer moved freely. His eyes sometimes opened mid-performance to remind himself that the world was watching. The joy that had once guided him now felt tangled with fear. He avoided checking messages too often. Each notification made him anxious. He worried that the spontaneity of his music, the honesty of the nights alone, might vanish under the weight of expectation. And yet, a part of him longed to share more, to see how far his music could reach. During one particularly long night of playing, he noticed how different the piano felt. The keys seemed heavier, almost reluctant, as if they too understood the pressure building. He closed his eyes tightly, letting his hands find their way through the maze of expectation. The first notes sounded stiff, but slowly, as he breathed, they began to flow. He played with intensity, letting every emotion rise to the surface. Frustration, doubt, longing, hope. By the end, his hands ached, but his chest felt lighter, as if the music had carried some of the weight away. Even so, the doubt lingered. What if he failed the next time someone watched? What if he lost the magic that made his music special? Nights began to carry more tension than peace. He played less freely, thinking more about judgment than feeling. His room, once a refuge, now felt like a stage. One evening, a close friend noticed the change. They didn't ask about the video or the attention. They simply watched him sit quietly before the piano, shoulders tense, eyes shadowed with worry. They didn't push, but stayed nearby, offering presence. He played for them that night, hands moving carefully, eyes mostly closed, and felt a glimmer of the old freedom. The friend didn't clap, didn't comment, but stayed until the final note faded. That quiet support reminded him that music was not just about an audience. It was about connection, whether visible or invisible. As time went on, he realized that the pressure could not be escaped entirely. Requests for performances became part of his life. Some nights he played in small cafes quietly, where only a few people listened. Other nights he performed for larger crowds who waited with expectation. Every time he felt a battle between control and surrender. The struggle was not just about skill. It was about honesty. He remembered why he started playing, the quiet nights alone, the way music helped him breathe, the way it helped him understand himself. He wanted to preserve that even while sharing it with the world. There were moments when the attention felt like a mirror. He saw himself not as he imagined, but as others saw him. A talented musician, an enchanter with hands that could fly over keys. That recognition felt strange, almost unreal. It was flattering, yes, but also terrifying. He wondered if people saw him or just the music he made. One night, after a long day of performances, he returned home exhausted. The city outside hummed as usual, indifferent to his struggles. He sat at his piano, hands hovering above the keys. He didn't start immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes, listened to his breathing, and let the quiet of his room sink in. When he finally played, he focused on honesty above all else. He played not for anyone, not for praise, not for expectation. He played as he always had, with eyes shut and hands guided by feeling. The music sounded alive, unpredictable, and entirely his own. For the first time in weeks, he felt free again. The pressure of the outside world had not disappeared, but it no longer dictated the shape of his music. Through that night, he realized something crucial. The world could watch, admire, and judge, but the music's true magic came from sincerity. He did not need to chase perfection or meet every expectation. He only needed to honor the connection between himself and the piano, between sound and feeling. The struggle continued, but he faced it differently now. Attention was no longer a burden. It was a reminder that his gift could touch others, but only if he stayed true to it. Each note became a small act of courage, each pause a moment of trust. He had learned that pressure could shape him, but it would not define him. By the end of the night, he leaned back, hands resting on the piano. His heart was still racing, but it carried a sense of balance he hadn't felt in weeks. He understood that attention was fleeting, but music was enduring. The connection he had built with himself, with sound, with emotion, could never be taken away. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the quiet struggle that had unfolded in a small room. Inside, he had reclaimed his music, his freedom, and his courage. The journey was far from over, but he knew that as long as he stayed honest, the piano would guide him through whatever came next. He sat alone at the piano, as he had for years, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The attention, the performances, the messages, it was all part of a path he hadn't planned, yet somehow it felt right. He took a slow breath, closed his eyes, and let his hands hover above the keys. This night was different. He didn't feel the pressure of an audience or the worry of expectation. Instead, he felt the quiet joy of returning to what mattered most: the music itself. Each note he played was born from memory, feeling, and a deep understanding of himself. He didn't rush, didn't hold back, and didn't pause unnecessarily. The music flowed naturally, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. The city outside was alive, but he no longer thought about it. He was not playing to impress anyone, to be seen, or to gain recognition. He was playing because he needed it, because it was the most honest form of expression he had ever known. His hands moved across the keys with a kind of freedom he had not felt since the earliest nights in his quiet room. He remembered the first time he played, alone when no one else mattered. The fear and shyness of a child had once guided his fingers slowly and cautiously. Now, decades later, he played with confidence, not arrogance, but with the assurance of someone who had earned their voice. Every chord, every pause, every rise and fall of sound was a reflection of his journey, of all the struggles and discoveries he had made along the way. He remembered the moment in the public place, the first time strangers had heard him play. It had changed everything, opening doors to attention he had never sought. At first, the praise had felt uncomfortable, almost invasive, but he had learned to use it as a reminder that his gift could reach others without losing its honesty. He did not need to chase fame or approval. He only needed to remain true to himself. The hands that moved across the keys were not just tools of music. They were storytellers, conveyors of emotion that words could never fully capture. They carried the weight of every quiet night, every fear and doubt, every tiny victory and revelation. And tonight, as they moved over the keys, they carried all of that into something new, something powerful and liberating. He played long into the night. Hours seemed to pass without notice. The notes traveled through the room, rising, falling, pausing, and rising again. He played melodies that felt ancient and timeless, yet entirely his own. There were moments of softness that whispered secrets, moments of intensity that roared with emotion, and moments of stillness that hung in the air like the pause between breaths. Every note was honest, every pause intentional. There was no performance, no audience to please, no expectation to meet. There was only the connection between him and the piano, between feeling and sound. The music was alive not because it was perfect, but because it was true. He smiled softly as he played, not for anyone else, but for himself. There was a deep sense of peace, a realization that the journey, with all its twists and turns, had brought him to this place of complete authenticity. He did not need applause, validation, or recognition. The music itself, the act of creating it, was reward enough. For years, he had lived quietly, unseen, unnoticed, and unrecognized. The world around him had moved at its own pace, indifferent to his struggles and triumphs. Yet, in the solitude of his music, he had discovered something universal: the power to express, to release, and to connect. Even when no one else listened, the music spoke for him, carrying his truth beyond the limits of words. He remembered the challenges of recent months, the pressure of attention, the doubt that sometimes crept in, the fear that his music might lose its soul under expectation. Those fears were no longer heavy. They had shaped him, tested him, and made him stronger. And now, sitting alone in the quiet room, he realized that true freedom came not from being seen or celebrated, but from embracing the authenticity of his own expression. As the night deepened, the music softened. He let the final notes linger, fading naturally into the silence. The room felt full, yet empty in the most beautiful way. He rested his hands on the keys, feeling the vibrations beneath his fingertips, and closed his eyes. He understood something fundamental. The magic of music was never in the recognition it received. It was in the honesty, the vulnerability, and the courage to play, even when no one else was watching. That was the true enchantment he had discovered long ago, in the quiet nights alone with his piano. He leaned back, chest rising and falling with a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. The journey was not over. There would be more performances, more attention, more moments where the world might notice. But he no longer feared them. He knew that his music would always remain his own, guided by feeling, honesty, and the freedom of expression. Outside, the city slept. Inside, he had played a story without words, a story that reflected a lifetime of emotion, discovery, and courage. He had found the balance between solitude and attention, between fear and joy, between expectation and authenticity. And in that quiet room, with the piano beneath his hands, he had finally understood what it meant to play like a true enchanter. The journey had begun in silence, with simple notes pressed by a hesitant hand. It had grown through struggle, doubt, and small triumphs. And now it had reached a point of clarity, beauty, and freedom. He closed his eyes, smiled softly, and let the stillness embrace him, knowing that the music would continue to speak, even beyond the reach of his own hands.